have a notification that recording is in progress by our lovely voice there. Okay. So welcome to the Kickstarter for Authors Zoom Ask Me Anything for backers of the Kickstarter for Authors Kickstarter. That just makes me laugh every time. Very meta. And so I'm going to launch into some of the pre-questions that people sent over before the meeting. And the first ones have to do with just types of projects to launch on Kickstarter. So that one question came in: how often does a successful debut novel Kickstarter yield a profit? It kind of depends on what you mean by profit, and that kind of folds right into the next question. So I'm going to roll that in with this one, which is it okay to set the campaign goal to also cover the cost of line and copy editing? So when you're launching a book on Kickstarter, I really like to take the approach that if you are publishing a book, then you are running a small business and there's some sunk upfront costs that you just have to accept and be ready to pay upfront. A lot of times people get into chicken or egg situations where people are like, well, I'd love to get a great book illustration, but I can't afford it. So I'm going to run a Kickstarter so that I can get my great book illustration. But particularly with things like your cover art, it's really important to have that done before you launch your Kickstarter, because Kickstarter backers really need to see what they're getting. Games and comics launch all the time without the thing completely done, but with enough mock-ups or enough sort of teaser graphics. A lot of times children's books will do hire the artist to do maybe 2 or 3 concept sketches and illustrations, just so that there's an indication of what's to come. It's really hard to ask people to put money down for something they have no idea what it even is going to look like. There's a couple exceptions. I've seen some Kickstarters out there with pretty good book mock-ups saying this is going to be kind of the cover placeholder, and then I'll get an even greater cover. But they're rarely successful unless you have a really great mock-up. And if you're going to do a really great mock-up, then just grit your teeth and get your cover if you can. And then the other costs like line and copy editing, those kinds of things, that's, again, just folded into your cost of doing business, folded into bringing a book to market. And think about Kickstarter with a debut book as a way to defray some of those costs so that when you do launch on the retailers, ideally you're launching in the black or close to it. Kickstarter is just your first bite at your book apple, right? So if you can, even for some people, pull in an extra $500 or $1,000 to go toward defraying your cost, then you're in good shape. And yes, it's a lot of work, but this entire publishing business is a lot of work, right? So it's just one step on the journey. So I do see sometimes people setting up Kickstarters for really high funding goals and for their book, and those don't always fund too. So if you're thinking, well, let's see, I'm going to need, this and that and that and that, and I'm going to need $8,000 to publish my debut novel, unless you make a really compelling campaign and a really good story reason for why your campaign goal is that high, because that is higher for publishing, particularly for something that isn't a lot of bells and whistles. Special edition is just you bringing out your book. That's a harder ask. So I would definitely encourage people to think about Kickstarter as a place to start to defray my costs. As far as debut novel, it is helpful if you can bring people to the table, but it's not 1,000% essential to have a large fan base. So that's one of the things that keeps authors from getting their toes wet and using Kickstarter, is this feeling of, well, I'm not super well known. No one's going to back my project. And you do have to do some work and try and get people, even if, at first it's maybe friends and family, um, and spread your word through your social media networks. Hopefully you have an author page. Hopefully you have a mailing list of people that you can kind of tap a little bit. You can build excitement on the social media platforms by sharing some chapters, doing some things. I mean, it is incumbent upon you as a creator to try and get people over to Kickstarter, but you don't have to get hundreds of people over to Kickstarter. Even if you can get 10, 20 people who will probably back your project. Kickstarter, as soon as they see the algorithms are set up so that as soon as a campaign starts to have some action, Kickstarter algorithms say, oh, hey, this is something that people are interested in. Let's show it to other people. And there are a lot of backers on Kickstarter who want to support creators and are little mini angel investors, and it doesn't matter that they haven't heard of you. If they think your book sounds good, if they like the look of your project, they will support you. So yes, a debut book can be successful and make a profit depending on what your expectations are. I wouldn't go in saying, well, I'm going to launch my debut on Kickstarter and make $30,000. That's unlikely unless you go super viral in some way. And sometimes you see that there's, people with TikTok platforms or big Instagrams, and they launch their debut on Kickstarter and it does amazing. But it's good to know if you see that, if you see a debut book on Kickstarter just blow up, it's good to be aware that there might be some behind the scenes factors like that 400,000 view TikTok that drove one book to fund really, really well, or an Instagram post that just completely took off. But if you're happy with kind of starting small and scaling bigger, Kickstarter will work for you. And you might, it's a little bit of roll of the dice, right? There are sometimes natural 20s. They're very rarely ones. You'll often at least have some kind of success with the platform. It kind of depends on what your aims are and what your expectations are. And I have a whole section in the book that talks about sort of adjusting those, putting those in alignment. I do want to say if you have an epic fantasy book or series, that epic fantasy is sort of the preferred genre on Kickstarter. So you kind of get to move to the head of the class if you're writing epic fantasy. Other genres, anything fantasy adjacent is going to do pretty well. And other genres like straight up contemporary romance struggles a little bit. Russell Nohelty, who also wrote a book with Monica Leonel called Get Your Book Selling on Kickstarter. That book's a couple years old now, but it still has some good information. And Russell has said, think of it as kind of the reverse of the genres that do really, really well on the retailers, particularly romance, do less well on Kickstarter. And the weird little genres tend to find a market more than they do on retailers. So that's something to know. If you have an epic fantasy book or a quirky book that is a genre mashup of weird Western and dragons, that could do really well as well. So not one clear answer. I think I can pretty confidently say that you can, if you follow the best practices, and almost any genre can get a $1,000 funding raise on Kickstarter at this point if you set your campaign up well. So historical romance, particularly Regency. It's funny that you mentioned that. I'm actually just about to start. I write also historical romance under the pen name Anthea Lawson, and I have a Kickstarter campaign that I'm launching on Monday for Victorian, but it's very Regency feel. It's very clean and full of all the tropes of Regency romance, basically. That is one of the genres that does way less well on Kickstarter. There are some historical romance authors out there who have done all right. What I would do if I were you is definitely, spy on my campaign that launches on Monday. It's called The Duke's Christmas, very Regency. And see how it does, but then also be aware that I am bringing a pretty big Kickstarter platform in at this point. So that'll be my 8th campaign. And I've found, and you too will find, or have already found, I know some of you have run a number of Kickstarters, that you will have backers who just support you because they like you and they like your books. And okay, they have a new campaign, sure, $5, $10. And that's just pretty amazing. The things they say about, stay in your genre lane for the retailers is absolutely the reverse at Kickstarter. You can totally genre hop and people are happy to follow you around. That's what I found. That's what a number of people have found. Sci fantasy would do pretty well. Science fiction, surprisingly, is not nearly as strong as like fantasy adjacent. So you have epic fantasy romance tends to do pretty well. Portal fantasy, urban fantasy a little bit, and then you're kind of some science fiction campaigns do really well, and some do, and by really well, I mean like from 5,000 up into the 5 figures, right? So I'll just get the terminology there. And again, it really depends. And it also depends on what other projects are live and going on Kickstarter at the same time yours is. So that is how often does a successful debut novel Kickstarter yield a profit? Fairly often, depending how you define profit, right? So if you want to just cover your costs of editing and cover and you haven't paid out a huge amount, or if your Kickstarter, does a healthy $4,000 raise, then you're probably good. You probably have covered your costs and you make a profit. If you come into it and you say, well, the sunk costs of launching a book are just part of the cost of doing business, and I'm not expecting my Kickstarter campaign to cover that for me, just like you're hoping that retailer sales will eventually cover that for you. Then if you set your Kickstarter up correctly, it doesn't matter how many people pledge as long as each of your tiers has some profit built in. So an ebook has some natural profit built in because there's no cost to create, print, and ship. If you are trying to do an offset print run, I would not recommend that for your first project unless you feel super ambitious and you know that you have a large following that you can bring to the platform. So far, all of my campaigns have been print on demand, mostly with Ingram. And so when I price, it doesn't matter if one person pledges for the hardcover tier or 10 or 100, because the tier scales, because I've set it up so that every pledge covers the cost of printing, the shipping, and yields, a decent profit for me as well. And then making sure I answered, is it okay to set the campaign goal to also cover the cost of line and copy editing? No, I wouldn't. If you do cover that, that's nice. One of the things to keep in mind about setting your Kickstarter funding goal is that it's a floor, not a ceiling. So if you say $500, which is the recommended funding goal set for first timers and for a lot of publishing campaigns in general, until you really feel confident that like, yeah, I can bring a lot of people. And if you're not trying to do an offset print run, that's going to cost you $5,000. So if you cannot make the project unless you get a certain funding goal, then set the funding to that. Like, don't go in the hole. But be aware that if you set a $500 funding goal, you will almost certainly exceed that. And sometimes you will exceed that by multitudes. And that kind of comes around to another question that comes up often, which is, well, don't people look at the fact that you have 1,000% funded campaign and think, oh, well, they're fine, I don't need to back for that? Not really, because this isn't like GoFundMe. It's not where I'm just like need to raise X amount of money and then I'm set. This is a way that people can pre-order your book. And if they like what you're offering, Doesn't matter that you're 1,000% funded. And in fact, for a lot of backers, I think there's psychology in there about like, hey, this is a cool thing. Everybody wants it. Me too, right? So I don't think there's necessarily a negative connotation with overfunding necessarily. Um, so should I set up a publishing LLC and launch the Kickstarter under that name? So my campaigns are all run under Fiddlehead Press, but it's really important to know that Kickstarter is very, very big on transparency and in some instances maybe a little too big. And your legal name that you use when you set up your banking information with Stripe, your legal name is going to appear on your Kickstarter campaign profile. And so you can run a Kickstarter with a kind of a front facing any pen name you want. But if anyone clicks through that to your profile on Kickstarter, they will see your legal name unless you get Kickstarter to change that for you. And it's been pointed out to them that particularly with authors, a lot of people write under pen names for important reasons, and that they need to let authors change their names. So if you need to change your name, and this information is also in the book, you are going to reach out to pwlsupport@kickstarter.com, and I'm putting that right now in the chat, and let them know who you are, what your pen name is, provide some documentation, and talk about why you need them to switch your legal name to show as your pen name. Also be aware that this is on a campaign by campaign basis. So you do it, your campaign runs, then you're setting up your next campaign. You need to go through the whole process with them again. It's not a one and done. So you can set up whatever company you want or use whatever name you want, but your legal name is going to be associated with your account. Do you have tips for people who run smaller campaigns? A lot of advice is for massive multi-book campaigns and not the smaller campaigns. But those big campaigns obviously get a lot of oxygen, right? Because they are huge in terms of the book scope and then also in terms of the funding goal. But I would say they are not actually the norm on Kickstarter. I really encourage people to go and just start poking around the platform, take a look at the projects that are out there, take a look at what's funding, and keep your expectations in line. You know, it can be really comparisonitis is can get you on this platform a little bit, right? There's someone right now who has a huge following, launched an incredibly beautiful special edition on Tuesday and is funded up over $150,000 right now. And that's not what your first campaign is going to do. But if you hit 1,500, are you going to feel good about that? Is that going to give you, you know, a little bit of kitty, a little bit of steak, enough to feel successful? That's just a question that you can ask. It is important to know that Kickstarter's gonna, it's a growth though. Like sometimes people splash on the scene and do great. A lot of times it's a slow build. I've seen a lot of creators start and their first campaign did okay. And their second campaign did better. And boy, by about your fourth campaign, you're pulling in $5,000 to $7,000 on your funding pretty regularly. And you understand a lot more about how the platform works. So smaller campaigns, just don't try and overdo as well. It's totally fine. My Duke's Christmas campaign is a smaller campaign in terms of it's got 3 books and only one of them is the main book. I'm not doing any bells and whistles. I'm not doing special edition. My highest pledge is a $70 tier. My lowest is a $1 tier. I'm keeping it super stripped down and simple for the holidays, just because the more complex your campaign, the more intense it is from a stress basis too. So starting with reasonable expectations and a more attainable campaign is a good way to go. So audiobooks. A lot of authors look at Kickstarter and our ears just perk right up and we get super excited about the possibility of funding our audio. It's like, well, I've got ebooks and I've got paperbacks and hardbacks, but I really, really want to raise funding for audio. Audio is a tough fund on Kickstarter if you're not rolling the audiobook in with some physical inside the physical package of a physical book, meaning that an audio campaign where you're asking like $4,000 to $6,000, depending, because you need that much to make the audio. And if you're only giving audiobooks and ebooks as rewards, your campaign is probably not going to fund. You're not going to make that. Kickstarter backers love physical books. They love to get their hands on something physical. So the sort of the hierarchy of book rewards are hardcovers. Probably very top is the collector's edition, special edition hardcovers. There's certainly people on Kickstarter that's what they back. They will happily plunk down $50, $70, $100 for your fancy special edition. Then there's just regular hardcovers, which plenty of people also just like. They like to have them on their shelves. Then there's paperbacks. Then there's ebooks. And then down at the very bottom in terms of desirability are audiobooks. They're way down here. So if you are doing an audiobook campaign, it's really a good idea if you're actually just doing a book campaign for the hardcover. And oh, by the way, we're going to hopefully fund enough that we can make audiobooks with this as well. So I don't know if that completely answers the question, but that kind of does lead to what is a good strategy for adding an audiobook as a stretch goal. So that kind of feeds into what I was just saying, which is, so you're setting up your main campaign around this, and then a stretch goal is when you reach a certain funding amount and then you unlock some other goodie in the campaign. The tricky thing with audio is that if you are going to make it a stretch goal that then's available to people who have pledged on the other pledge levels, which is usually how stretches work, that it just everyone's support kind of unlocks this goodie or this thing that's now available for everyone. And you don't then upcharge once you've opened your stretch. So then you have to build your audio reward cost if you feel like you're definitely going to hit it into those physical tiers. But the thing is too, as authors, we tend to overvalue what audio is worth because we have to pay so much for it. So we're like, of course, each audiobook is worth $25. But the market suggests an audiobook is worth between $10 and $15. If you think about how really big audiobook consumers consume audio, it's through Audible credits, which are at about $12 a credit, or it's through buying the ebook on Amazon and then whisper syncing the audio for another $7.50. So campaigns that do audio and put that audiobook cost at $25 really, really struggle. Campaigns that put the audiobook cost at $10 do much, much better. Campaigns that are like, heck, sure, I'm happy to give away the audio. $5 extra is, so let's say your hardback tier is $45 your reward, and you just boost it up to $50 and say, when we hit the audio stretch reward, everybody's going to get the audiobook along with the hardcover, also the ebook along with the hardcover. That's another thing that is generally just sort of a consideration. Thank you for pledging $45 for my hardcover, and you also get the ebook without an upcharge. And people have some different takes on that. There's some people who say, well, there should be an extra $2 upcharge. Some people say, no way, sure, have all the goodies. I tend to err on the side of generosity and really taking care of the backers who pledge on Kickstarter, because they will have other options, and they will have retail, or they will have Audible. And so if I can delight and please them in advance and get them really happy about what I'm offering, then that's what I prefer to do. So that's the audio questions. There's one more. Is graphic audio a good option to consider? I mean, maybe if you think that your fans would go for it, and if you think you can raise enough of your funding to cover it, And then there was one more audio question. If I decide to do an audiobook as a stretch goal, what recording company would you recommend and how to reach out to them? That's outside the scope of my Kickstarter talk, but I would look into Findaway Voices as a place to start, or you can go through ACX. So getting now into slightly more advanced questions. There's a question about backer kit or another pledge manager for campaigns. So what pledge managers are is they started because the Kickstarter platform wasn't fully meeting creators' needs around fulfillment once a campaign ended. What pledge managers do is they do not fulfill your books. They do not send your books out for you. They definitely don't send your physical books out. Some of them help you get your digital goodies to backers. But now there's BookFunnel for that, which I highly, highly recommend you use. So what the pledge managers do is threefold. Firstly, a lot of campaigns on Kickstarter are for games or for, things that have to be manufactured, and it's going to take probably a year, if not longer, for that thing after the campaign raises enough money to fund it for those things then to be made. And if people charge shipping during the campaign and then a year passes, those shipping costs are not accurate any longer. I think last year the post office raised rates 4 or maybe 5 times here in the US. So what do you do? Yeah. And so the pledge managers came on, and one of the things they do is they charge shipping after the fact. And sometimes they'll do the shipping charge when you as a creator are ready to ship your thing. So that really helped the game companies and the physical goods companies not take a bath on the shipping, because then they could charge that shipping later. For books, particularly if your book is pretty close, or you're going to be delivering your rewards within 2 or 3 months of your campaign close, it's not that much of a big deal to figure the shipping in. The second reason that pledge managers started was because there's always going to be people late to the campaign, right? There's always going to be your people on Facebook messaging and saying, "Oh no, I missed your campaign, but I really want your thing. What do I do?" And so the pledge managers allow you to kind of open a back end store a little bit after your Kickstarter campaign is finished, where people can get all of the things that they missed. With the proliferation of direct stores now among authors, I think that if you have a direct store, it fits that same need. And I've also seen people really successfully just put up a Google sheet for post orders that say, "Hey, sorry you missed my Kickstarter. Here's where you can order the things. And this is going to close in a week. So come fill it out if you're interested in the thing." And then they invoice via PayPal. And that's a way to kind of add on orders. And then the third thing that pledge managers help with is people will pledge to your campaign, and then the campaign ends, and usually there's at least one, if not more, errored pledges. And what that is someone's credit card was declined, or the details didn't go through correctly. And after 7 days, Kickstarter drops those people from your campaign. You lost that pledge. They never fix their details. The pledge managers will help you kind of keep that open a little bit longer, and they will also be really assertive about going after those drop pledges. But this is something you can DIY pretty easily as an author. As soon as I get an errored pledge, I send the person a message via Kickstarter that says, "Hey, your pledge didn't go through. Go ahead and look into it." And then as we get closer to their drop day, I email and say, "Do you still want this? Here's an alternative way to pay just in case there's some other issues or if you need to do it later." So all of that is by way of saying, I'm on my 8th campaign now, and I have never used a pledge manager. I just use the Kickstarter native tools that they give, and I think they're getting better all the time. But particularly if you're really worried about shipping, a pledge manager can be a good way to go. I recommend Pledgebox first, and then BackerKit second. Can you give advice on launching a subsequent Kickstarter for a series after the first Kickstarter was a single book? Yes. I give this advice all the time. What approach for marketing, goal considerations, etc., would one need to do differently? So, Kickstarter, their mission statement is bringing creative projects to life. And you want to bring a new project to life, but you can offer your backlist. You can offer your older stuff. So, let's say you did book one of a series, a Kickstarter for that, and then book two is getting ready. So your Kickstarter would be for the series, because you are always going to be running into new backers on Kickstarter. A way to think about Kickstarter is if you are tabling at a convention and people are just constantly walking by, and you don't really want to be saying, hey, everyone, look, book two. People be like, well, but what about book one? So I would run a campaign for the series, and book two is the new thing, and give people an option to only pledge for book two, but also make sure that there's an entry into your series for new backers. And then same thing with book three, et cetera, et cetera. So new campaign, your newest book is the new thing that's being created, but you're also offering your backlist, because ideally you're growing your footprint on Kickstarter, you're reaching new backers. So that should answer that one. There are annual themed campaigns on Kickstarter. The two that books are particularly well suited for is the January Make 100. And then in October, this is the second year, Kickstarter is running something called Witch Starter, which are like magic and divination, but also witchy themed projects of any kind. Last year, there was hundreds of thousands of tarot decks, probably not that many, but there was a lot of oracle decks and tarot decks and witchy things. But there were also a lot of witch books and paranormal books and any book with magic at all. And Kickstarter does try and give a little extra push to the projects that are in these curated promotions that they do. And the way that you get into it is you can either go when they first announce, hey, Witch Starter is coming. And if you go to the Kickstarter site, you'll see a little purple and pink banner, and you can create your project through that. But even easier is just email support@kickstarter.com and say, hey, I think my project would be good for Witch Starter. Could you give me the tag? And invariably, if you're asking it, you probably are a good fit and they'll give it to you. Same with Make 100. And Make 100 that runs any campaign in January, just like Witch Starter in October. You don't have to run the entire month. You can start in October and go into September, November. You can start in September and go into October. It doesn't have to be like, oh, I'm only constrained within October. So what Make 100 is that's during January, and it's Kickstarter's way of encouraging creators to get their feet wet with a project that you're going to only do 100 of. And people use this in all kinds of creative ways, because some people are like, well, only 100 books. I'm like, that's going to be a small campaign. So I'm going to offer all my books, but I'm going to do handmade dragon pendants, and I'm going to offer 100 of the dragon pendants with the hardcover tier. And then once the dragon pendants are gone, they're gone. So you can be very creative within the Make 100. It doesn't have to be, I'm only offering 100 copies of my book. Again, they will probably in December set up the portal that you can click through and then create your campaign via that. As authors, though, we tend to be a little more on top of the ball, right? We're used to setting up pre-orders way in advance, kind of getting our ducks in a row. So if you already have a campaign in process and then you see, oh, look, they've opened up Make 100, just send a email to support@kickstarter.com. And you will know if you are in the Kickstarter for Authors group, people will say, hey, which starter just opened, or Make 100 opened, and you will get that information. So that's the Facebook group is just a great place to get all that top of the moment information. And so that's how the annual themed campaigns go. Authors also do some some fun sort of cross promo and themes. There's a bunch of dragon related campaigns right now on Kickstarter, and Nicolette Andrews has pulled together just a little banner and, hey, everybody with dragon campaigns, let's cross promote our dragons to each other. Sometimes I ran a May is for Fae Kickstarter campaigns, set up just a book funnel with sales landing pages that people could just go through on a Kickstarter and support that way. So good. We still have about 20 minutes left, and those were the pre-questions that came in. So go ahead and start typing questions in the chat, and I will get to them as I may. What's a good rate of posting updates to your backers after the campaign is successfully funded, finished? Actually, you want to be updating. I'm going to take this in two parts because you want to be updating during the campaign. You want to be sending a backer update every 3 to 4 days while your campaign is live. And then once your campaign finishes, you want to update right away. Hey, we're done. And then you want to update enough to let backers feel in the loop about how things are going. So anytime you hit some milestones, like all the digital rewards are going out, or, hey, I need your surveys. I sent the surveys out so that I can get the information to deliver your rewards, or here's a update on what's going on with the paperbacks. So enough to keep backers in the loop without completely deluging. If a month has gone by and you have not made a backer update, backers can actually request that you update. So I would definitely update at least before a month ends, just to keep people in the loop until all the way the campaigns are completed. You should always do a final closing backer update, and these should be public facing, that says, because again, Kickstarter transparency, they want other people to be able to see your clear communication in action. So your final backer update about the campaign should be, everything is out. You should have gotten your rewards. If you didn't, please let me know. Thank you so much for supporting. And then your next backer update to that campaign is when you have your next campaign in pre-launch. And you say, hey, it's me again. I'm doing another campaign. I'm super excited about it. Please come over and follow the campaign. So those backers and those campaigns are still there, and they're reachable. And that's, one of the great things about Kickstarter is this direct connection we can get to our backers, and a lot of dynamic data from Kickstarter about supporters and where they're coming from, which is just great. Okay. I sent this question in advance. Yes, Kickstarters that offer physical goods, such as autographed books, limit to backers in the United States. Oh, right. Yes. Thank you. I can't believe that didn't get on my list. The whole international shipping can of worms, right? So as U.S. creators, if you're here in the U.S., we are not used to paying crazy high shipping amounts, but international people are unfortunately used to paying high, crazy shipping amounts. And, it's a kind of a bummer, but I wouldn't let the fact that you have to charge a lot of international shipping keep you from putting out international tiers for your books. But there are ways around it. So autographed books, if you are doing print on demand, POD through Ingram or Book Vault is a great new player in the POD field. You can drop ship those books. And there's a couple of ways you can get around the autograph thing. One of the easiest is send a signed book plate. Have a few little paper goodies, right? Maybe a bookmark, maybe a little postcard, and your signed book plate, and you put a first class international stamp. And now it's not completely hand signed, but that book is out there. So drop shipped from print on demand is a really good way to go. If you're doing super blingy special editions, then collectors are used to paying more to get their autographed copies in hand. So again, don't be afraid to charge what the international shipping is going to be. Like 90, right. So going over to the States to drop ship from Canada. So now we're talking about Canadian and the Australian creators are even worse off because it's incredibly expensive to ship out of Australia. And so the Australian creators I know just do drop ship campaigns. Basically, it's just too expensive otherwise to try and get books into people's hands in Europe, the US, Canada. So for Canadian, Canada Post doesn't have like a media mail rate, which we're very lucky to have here in the US. And media mail is really your friend if you're an author doing book fulfillment. I would, if you can, make it over to the US. And I've known Canadian creators do that. They actually have a friend in the US that they send the books to. They drive down, cross the border, have a great big book signing, mailing weekend, and get all the books out from the US. And if you're shipping within the US books, you can do media mail. There is an outfit called Pirate Ship. So there's all these shipping consolidators out there that usually they allow you to print your labels at home, and they usually give you much better deals off of postage that's not media mail. So no one can give you a cheaper media mail rate because the post office has pinned that to the bottom. That's what it is. But if you want to ship overseas, Pirate Ship has what they call the simple export rate. And that is a really reasonable ship cost for anything under 4 pounds. In fact, I know people who have had packages that weigh more than 4 pounds, and they find that if they break that up into 2 packages that are under 4 pounds each, they're in better shape just for cost wise. So that's something to look into, Pirate Ship's simple export rate. I do know of a U.S. firm that will handle shipping of rewards to addresses outside the U.S., particularly special editions, and that is Merrick Books. This is Andrew Cobble, and he is amazing. He also helps authors with special edition, very blingy, higher end. So there are those collector's editions out there. If you've been paying attention to this at all in the Kickstarter space, the top of the line is Wraithmarked Books, and they do amazing special editions. And then Merrick Books is Andrew Cobble, and what he does is he helps authors, and he's an author himself who has run some very successful Kickstarters. He will help you, he will consult, and he'll take care of the shipping section of it. So a number of the special edition books that are up right now, Jeffrey Kohanek's Fate of Wizardoms, Brene Renner's Inked series that's up there right now, Alicia Klaficki's Dragons Rising. Those are all special editions that are being run by Merrick Books, and he will handle the fulfillment side. So he can help you with the special edition, or you can just have your book shipped to his warehouse. And he, I think for $3 an order, will get them out to wherever. So he's well aware that it's definitely a need. So I would talk to him. I hope that helped. There are a couple of other sort of fulfillment outfits. I think Bookmobile is another one. There's a list in the Kickstarter for Authors group as well. I'll make sure it's up to date. So those are my other solutions. Swag or other items to include in a campaign. Are there types of items you've found to be more successful? Are there types that are more trouble than they're worth? Yes. Any paper swag is a good way to go, right? So bookmarks, character cards, cover postcards. Sometimes people go a little blingy. You can get foiled. There's the Foil Print Company, which is in Canada, but they do amazing foiling. I believe Moo, M-O-O, also does foiled. So if you wanted to add something, an extra little bit of bling without kind of going over the top. Soft goods. I know Thorn Coil, who's run a lot of successful Kickstarters, they have done hoodies and t-shirts. I advise people to stay away from bulky and breakable items because they're going to be expensive to ship and they're going to break, and then you're going to have to replace them. So things like mugs, generally stay away from. I've seen authors do like plastic tumblers with a logo. Those are okay. Candles, I guess some of the high-end book boxes like to do candles and jewelry and blingy things like that. But I really recommend you just stick to flat goods, paper goods, stickers. A lot of times people do stickers. Or like notebook, themed notebooks. I've seen those go out. And a lot of those things you can just stick in with the media mail. There's different opinions about what you can send media mail, and when in doubt, go to your post office, show your postal people, this is what I'm going to put in my media mailboxes. It's okay, and they'll tell you. But you can pretty much get away with flat ship paper goods in your media mail. And really price your stuff out well. I've seen authors raise a lot of funds on a Kickstarter and then heard after the fact that they barely broke even because they kind of got a little crazy with, oh, I'm going to do these and those and t-shirts and tumblers and candles and then pretty soon their profit was gone. So be really careful about that. Campaigns can totally succeed without swag. Or you can do digital swag, or you can do things like, I'm going to write a short story if we get, whatever funding goal or however many number of backers, or I'm going to do a printable bookmark that goes out digitally and then everyone can print it off, or I'm going to do a fiddle concert, or I'm going to have a Zoom, ask me anything, or a Zoom cup of tea with the author. I mean, there's a lot of things that you can add to your campaign that don't actually have to be physical things that you have to make. So kind of think outside the box a little too. Think about what you might like from your favorite author that maybe isn't a thing, right? Are there any limits for BookFundle for sending ebooks and other digital rewards? It depends on what tier you're paying for. I think there's a basic tier that does have, it's inexpensive, but there are limits. And then as you go up tiers, you can do more. So take a look at their payment plan, but BookFunnel's highly, highly worth it. Almost everyone's using BookFunnel now to deliver their books, which means that backers are really comfortable with how BookFunnel works. And the other great thing about BookFunnel is that they do the customer service troubleshooting. Like if someone's having a problem with their book, send them to BookFunnel. And that is just a huge weight off our shoulders as authors, because we don't want to also have to be the tech support for our digital books, right? Yes, thank you, Karen, for that answer. Yeah, $5,000 a month, which, sorry, 5,000, not dollars, 5,000 books a month can go out at the mid-level. Is there a goal people should be aiming for with pre-launch followers? If someone has under 10, does it make more sense to wait to launch until you have a better number? It's a really good question. Right now, I am seeing with more and more campaigns coming on Kickstarter, I mean, that space is filling up a little bit, but the other thing to remember is that every author is ideally bringing some new readers in. So there's kind of there's an ebb and flow a little bit, but it is becoming a slightly more crowded space. So it's more and more essential to launch with some visibility. And so I do recommend that you try for 25 backers before you launch. And this is on your pre-launch page. Sorry, not backers, followers. You have a pre-launch, which is not the same as your campaign page. You set your pre-launch up from your promotions area of your Kickstarter campaign after it's approved, but you do not hit the live button. And I've seen a number of authors make this mistake. It's easy to think it's like a pre-order, right? Where it's set up and then you just hit live and then no, you have to create your pre-launch page separately. So the more followers you have at launch, the more likely you are to get a lot of pledges right away and get over your funding goal really quickly. And there's a lot of reasons to do that, not the least of which is your stress over, am I going to hit my funding goal, right? So 25 minimum, I would say, and if you can do more, that's better. On the other hand, if your goal is low and your expectations are reasonable, don't let the fact that you don't have a bunch of pre-launch followers stop you from launching either. So kind of figure out what works for you. Can you type the other special edition producer I mentioned? There are a lot of special edition producers. Oh, the POD, right? So the POD are Book Vaults and Ingram. And those are really Lulu. I'll type in Lulu too. Lulu they're way more expensive, but Lulu, if you're doing high-end color books, they really do some. Oh, right, I will do that. The thing with Lulu is their print cost is higher, but they were set up to drop ship everywhere in the world. They were like early on hey, we're going to have printers everywhere, and then people can just like drop ship their stuff. So if you have, for certain kind of projects, it's worth looking into Lulu. Print cost is higher, but go all the way through and look at what your drop ship cost is per country, and that might be closer to $5 to $10 once you've covered your printing costs. Bookmobile is the other. I think they will help with fulfillment. So Merrick doesn't do special edition printing. They'll help connect you with their printers, usually overseas printers. There's ones in China, there's ones in the UK. Those tend to be the least expensive for if you're doing an offset print run. If you do want a print run, a smaller print run, 48-hour books will do foiled hardcovers, faux leather, ribbon, bookmarks, things like that. And I think you can do as few as 50 copies, but they're going to be expensive. You know, the more copies you can get up to scale, the cheaper it gets. Wraithmarked is they pick you basically. I think if they hand select top indies with very strong following, usually in epic fantasy, and they run their campaigns. So I would say if you want help and you want to approach someone, approach Merrick Books. But Wraithmark are like, they do their own thing. I think they are only available to a certain very, very high select tier of authors, and particularly fantasy, although I have seen them do a little cyberpunk. So did we get anything? I think that's all the questions, and we still have a couple minutes. Does anyone have anything else they would like to know? They've been wondering, they like insider tips. Robert, did you have more questions? Did I answer your shipping question enough? Good. So what is next for this campaign? I think I mentioned that Kickstarter just rolled out a big, brand new, complete revamping of their text editor for how campaigns are set up. So that was fun because I'm editing my book right now, and there's a whole section that I get to go rewrite now. So that might put me a teeny bit behind the curve in terms of delivering the book. But the upside of that is that it landed while I was still in process of the book and not right after I sent out everyone's rewards. And oh, surprise, the creative part of the campaign looks completely different now. So no surprises. But be aware of that. Everyone should have gotten their PDF, their link to the PDF of the checklist. So definitely, if you have not seen that yet, go and check your Kickstarter messages, your email, and grab your checklist, which is going to give you a lot of information just to walk through your campaign. What's the most surprising thing I learned along my Kickstarter journey? The most surprising thing is when people start supporting you, and even though you hope for it, you wake up and you've hit your funding goal and the pledges are still coming, and there's this amazing feeling of support. out there in the world. And it's not just like nickel and diming, oh, I made another 35 cents on my 99-cent book at Amazon. It's like people coming in the door. My first campaign, I had a $110 tier of a great big omnibus hardback and then 3 other hardbacks. And that was my most pledged to tier in my campaign. And a lot of backers came in at the $110 tier who had never heard of me, but who liked the look of my books and were like, sure. And it was just, I could not believe it. And every day I'd wake up thinking, oh, but that was kind of a mirage. Like, surely all those pledges will not be there when I look, and they were. And so that was the most surprising and wonderful thing, is just the support that can be out there for authors. POD in the EU, probably Lulu is going to be the only one that I know of right now. Since Book Vault's only UK and Ingram no longer has their EU plant, they're just UK as well. So it's probably going to be Lulu. Yes, or do you recommend Lulu? Yes, I do. Even though they're more expensive, so you're just going to have to sort of do that calculation. The other place that does POD that we didn't really talk about is Amazon, but your book has to be live at the point that you try to start shipping. So that can somewhat defeat the purpose of getting your book out early to Kickstarter backers. However, if you're delivering some backlist rewards, then that might be a way to go. I know some authors have run into issues drop shipping their books into foreign countries. I think Switzerland can be a tough one to get your books into, but again, that's something to look at, and maybe to help defray the costs if you're doing a front list book, but then some backlist. Maybe the front list is going to be a little more expensive or come from a different printer, and the backlist can come from Amazon potentially. So good. We are out of time. I really appreciate all of you joining me here, and I hope your questions were answered. As you can tell, I love to talk about Kickstarter, and I'm looking forward to getting the book in your hands. So keep an eye on the backer updates and come over to the Kickstarter for Authors group. I'm going to pop that link in one more time, just because I don't want you to miss it. And really, it's my favorite virtual space in the world right now. So there's that link. Oh, Melinda, you missed it. You know what? We recorded this, and I'm going to figure out how to host it and get it to, I'll get a link to everybody so you can rewatch, or you can catch it if you missed it. And then later on, this will go out there in the world, probably around right before 20 books, because I'm going to be at a Kickstarter panel at 20 books, which I hope to see you there. And also feel free to reach out to me via Messenger, Kickstarter. My email is antheasharp@hotmail.com if you have any questions or anything you need to know. So thank you all so much, and I will see you soon, probably in the Facebook group. All right.